The air in the Lumina Grand Conclave hummed with 1,000 different languages, a living tapestry of galactic diplomacy and ancient power, yet all of it seemed to shrink in quiet under the burgeoning fury of Queen Zelera. Her bioluminescent crest, usually a serene azure, now pulsed with an agitated crimson, reflecting the tempest brewing within her. For 3 standard solar cycles, a single, unassuming human had become a persistent shadow, an inexplicable smudge on the pristine canvas of her reign. He wasn't a spy easily identified, nor an assassin making clumsy threats. He was simply there, an unignorable, calm presence that appeared in the most impossible of places. He had materialized at the edge of her private morning meditation garden, a place protected by layers of ancient energy shields. He had been spotted, a fleeting glimpse, near the highly secured Lumina Prime planetary defense grid. And most recently and most gallingly, he had stood in the outer ring of the Grand Conclave itself, a mere whisper of motion amongst the towering, multi-limbed and shimmering beings of a dozen star-spanning civilizations, all focused on her, the sovereign of the Lumina. Queen Zelera, renowned for her composure, her strategic brilliance, and her almost inhuman patience, felt a strange, unfamiliar itch of frustration grow into a burning irritation. Her guards, the finest and most loyal in the galaxy, creatures of unparalleled speed and stealth, had attempted to apprehend him repeatedly, only to find their grasping limbs meeting empty air, their energy nets passing through where he had just been. Kale, as he was known from the sparse, bewildered diplomatic records, never fought, never resisted violently. He simply wasn't there when they reached for him, a disconcerting trick of space and timing that bordered on the mystical. He would appear, a quiet, almost apologetic figure with short, dark hair and eyes that held an unnerving depth, always holding a simple, unadorned data slate that pulsed with faint, complex symbols only he seemed to understand. He never spoke. Unless spoken to, never moved aggressively, yet his very presence was an affront, a challenge to her authority and the flawless security of the Lumina Empire. He was an anomaly, a tiny, annoying pebble in her perfectly crafted cosmic shoe dot today, however, was different. The Grand Conclave was at its peak, the atmosphere thick with the weighty decisions that would shape the future of their quadrant. Delegates from the crystalline Cathar, their forms shimmering with captured starlight, debated trade routes with the massive rock-skinned Grolok. The ethereal whispers of the Sylvans mingled with the guttural commands of the mechanoids, all under the watchful, ever-present eye of Queen Zelera. Her crest pulsed, a steady rhythm that usually calmed and unified. But then, as she prepared to deliver a crucial address concerning interstellar energy distribution, she saw him, not lurking in the shadows, not a fleeting shadow, but standing, openly, a human length away from a towering six-legged Grolok ambassador, his head tilted slightly, his eyes, those infuriatingly calm human eyes, fixed directly on her. He held up his data slate, its screen glowing with patterns that seemed to shift and dance in a way her own advanced Lumina devices could not replicate, an act of silent, maddening communication that only deepened her VEXATION dot. It was too much. The sheer audacity, the persistent, almost gentle mockery of her every security measure, the absolute baffling lack of any clear motive for his actions, all converged into a single overwhelming wave of exasperation. Her usually melodic voice, known for its ability to command entire fleets with a whisper, now boomed with an uncharacteristic, almost primal edge that sliced through the multi-species chatter like a sonic blade. The vibrant hum of the conclave died instantly, replaced by a sudden heavy silence. Every single being, from the smallest Sylvan to the largest Grolok, turned their myriad eyes towards their queen, then towards the unassuming human, who stood utterly still, unflinching under the collective gaze of galactic power. "Why do you keep following me, human?" she demanded, her voice echoing off the crystalline arches, her multiple eyes narrowing on the lean figure of Kale. The question wasn't just about his physical proximity. It was about the constant invasion of her thoughts, the unraveling of her peace, the inexplicable disruption he represented in her perfectly ordered universe. It was a cry born of profound frustration and an utter lack of understanding. Kale, subjected to the combined scrutiny of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, and the raw, unbridled frustration of their queen, merely offered a small, weary smile, a gesture that was either a profound act of defiance or a sign of utter sincerity that she couldn't decipher. His gaze remained unwavering, fixed on Xylura's agitated form. He held up the data slate once more, its mysterious symbols continuing their silent, urgent dance, as if trying to convey a message only he could interpret, a message he desperately wanted her to understand. Her elite guards, two towering figures of living light and honed reflexes, surged forward, their energy whips humming with barely contained power. They were prepared to finally seize him, to answer her queen's unspoken command. But Kale simply took a single precise step back, not in fear, not in retreat, but as if anticipating their movement by a fraction of a second, his body shifting with an almost imperceptible ease. His eyes, however, never left Xylura's, maintaining that silent, persistent plea, a profound, unsettling mystery in their depths. The Lumina Queen watched, her anger momentarily overshadowed by a flicker of pure bewilderment. He was not a threat, in the way she understood threats, nor a supplicant seeking favor. He was something else entirely, an enigma wrapped in human flesh, and his persistent, baffling presence was beginning to chip away at the very foundations of her galactic authority and her own perfect self-control. The silence in the grand conclave stretched, heavy with unanswered questions and the unsettling presence of one small human who refused to be ignored. The iridescent light of the Lumina Grand Conclave, which moments before had reflected the shock of 1,000 species at their queen's unprecedented outburst, now shimmered with an even heavier silence, thick with anticipation and the unspoken question of what would happen next to the audacious human. Queen Xylura, her crest still pulsing faintly with lingering agitation, watched as Kale, with uncanny grace, sidestepped her elite guards, his movement so fluid it seemed less like evasion and more like the air itself parting for him, leaving the formidable warriors confused and reaching for empty space, their imposing forms now looking awkwardly ineffective. A sigh, heavy with something akin to exasperation, but also a burgeoning, reluctant curiosity, escaped her. She raised a hand, a gesture that immediately halted her surging guards, their weapons dimming as they fell back into rigid formation, their multifaceted eyes still fixed on Kale, ready to pounce at the slightest command. "Speak, human." she commanded, her voice now stripped of its booming anger, replaced instead with a cold, cutting challenge that held a hint of weary curiosity. Explain this obsession. The word obsession hung in the air, a loaded accusation. Kale, now the singular focus of every eye in the vast chamber, slowly lowered the data slate, his expression unreadable. To the lumina's complex emotional sensors, but to a human observer, it conveyed earnestness, a deep-seated conviction that bordered on desperation. He looked directly at Queen Zalara, his gaze unwavering, betraying no fear, no arrogance, only a quiet, urgent plea. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice calm, clear, and surprisingly steady in the echoing silence of the Grand Conclave. Stark contrast to the Queen's recent outburst. "I am not following you for personal gain or malice, nor for any political advantage." A ripple of disbelief passed through the assembled delegates, quickly stifled by Zylara's sharp gaze. "I am following the patterns," Kale continued, ignoring the subtle shift in the air, his tone becoming more focused, as if he were speaking directly to a single, confused mind rather than a grand assembly. The energy fluctuations, the almost imperceptible discrepancies in the ancilla grid that powers your homeworld, Lumina Prime. The mention of the ancilla grid caused a stir, a low hum of chatter that quickly died down under the Queen's stern. "Look, the ancilla grid was the very lifeblood of Lumina Prime, a marvel of ancient Lumina engineering, a self-sustaining, perfectly balanced energy matrix that drew power from the very fabric of the universe, channeling it through intricate crystalline conduits beneath the planet's surface. It was considered flawless, unbreachable, the ultimate expression of Lumina perfection. To suggest a discrepancy in it was heresy or madness." Queen Zylara's multifaceted eyes narrowed further, her initial weariness giving way to a renewed wave of suspicion. Was this a new, more insidious form of espionage? A clever ploy to gain access to their most sacred technology? Her pride, a deep, ancient thing, bristled at the human's insolence. Kale, seemingly oblivious to her internal struggle, pressed on, his voice gaining a quiet urgency. "I've discovered a critical, growing instability within your seemingly perfect energy system, an instability that only presents itself when specific, unpredictable cosmic phenomena interact with Lumina's unique energy-absorbing architecture." He gestured briefly with the data slate, its screen now displaying a complex, three-dimensional diagram of intersecting energy lines, twisting and contorting in ways that seemed fundamentally wrong to the Lumina's aesthetic sense of balance. "Your instruments, Your Majesty, are designed to detect faults, breakages, and predictable overloads. They are not designed to perceive the subtle, harmonic disruptions that occur when your grid encounters chaotic external forces on a quantum level. It's like trying to detect a whispered secret in a hurricane with a thunder detector." He wasn't following her, Kale explained, his voice low and intense, his eyes flickering between the Queen and the intricate diagrams on his slate. He was following the imminent collapse. He elucidated how certain, seemingly random cosmic events, distant supernovas, passing dark matter clouds, even the gravitational ripples from unseen stellar nurseries created fleeting, unquantifiable echoes that resonated with the ancilla grid's specific frequency. These echoes, individually negligible, were, when combined and amplified by the grid's own perfect resonance, creating microscopic fractures, accumulating silent damage that your systems fail to register. And your proximity to crucial power conduits, Your Majesty, particularly within these high-traffic, ceremonial areas like the conclave, makes you an unwitting indicator, a focal point where these subtle disturbances manifest most clearly in the ambient energy readings. My instruments, simple as they may seem, are attuned to these specific low-level quantum fluctuations, a sensitivity your technology, for all its power, appears to lack. I don't see a fault. I see a growing cascade. It's like a hairline crack in an immense dam. Your sensors only look for gushing water, not the slow, silent widening of the fissure. Giler listened, her regal posture stiffening with each word, her bioluminescent crest now a dull, steady blue, reflecting her deep concentration. Her initial skepticism, honed by centuries of dealing with ambitious species and cunning deceivers, warred fiercely with the human's unwavering conviction. A conviction so profound it felt like a physical presence in the chamber. He spoke with a simple clarity that cut through the usual diplomatic jargon, a directness that was unsettling. Was this a desperate plea, a human attempting to save his own hide by fabricating a grand lie? Or was it a remarkably elaborate, subtle form of espionage designed to sow fear and gain unprecedented access to the Lumina's vital infrastructure? The thought made her multiple eyes narrow to slits. Her engineers, the most brilliant minds of their civilization, had repeatedly assured her of the Ancilla grid's infallible nature. Their diagnostic readouts were always green, flawless. Yet the human stood before her, unarmed, unafraid, his humble data slate filled with what he claimed was proof of impending doom, proof that her own superior technology could not provide. The silence in the grand conclave, once broken by her shout, now held the heavy weight of an unbelievable claim, a potential catastrophe, and the agonizing dilemma of a queen forced to weigh the impossible word of a persistent human against the established, unshakable truths of her own advanced civilization. A shiver, not of cold but of profound unease, traced its way down her spine. The human's quiet intensity was more disarming than any direct threat, and the possibility, however remote, that he might be speaking the terrifying truth was a thought that began to gnaw at the very core of her perfect composure, the calculated silence that had fallen over the grand conclave. After Cale's startling revelations about the Ancilla grid lingered for days across Lumina Prime, a silent, weighty presence in the opulent halls of power, mirroring the uneasy truce that now existed between Queen Xylura's deep-seated skepticism and a burgeoning, unsettling curiosity. Despite Cale's urgent warnings delivered with such disarming earnestness, the Queen remained unconvinced, her logical Lumina mind struggling to reconcile his outlandish claims with centuries of flawless engineering and her own engineers' unwavering assurances of the Ancilla grid's perfection. She viewed his intricate diagrams and frantic energy patterns as either a remarkably sophisticated ploy to gain access to their sacred systems, or perhaps more charitably, a profound misunderstanding of Lumina technology, a simplistic human interpretation of complexities far beyond his grasp. Yet something about the human's unwavering conviction, his quiet, almost mournful insistence, had lodged itself in her thoughts, a tiny, irritating shard of doubt that refused to be dislodged. He was no longer actively following her in. the overt, physically baffling way he had before. Instead, he seemed to simply materialize within her direct vicinity, a silent, almost spectral presence at council meetings, in the grand promenade she occasionally traversed, or even just within the wider diplomatic complex, not speaking unless spoken to, but always observing. He wasn't intruding anymore in a way that prompted her guards to action. He was simply present, an uninvited but now inexplicably unremovable guest, a constant reminder of his ominous prophecy and his mere existence near her, always with that glowing data slate, served as a quiet challenge to her perfect order. Then, imperceptibly at first, the first tremors began. They weren't the physical quakes that would shake the foundations of buildings or shatter the crystalline streets of Lumina Prime. Rather, they were minute, almost undetectable fluctuations in the planet's internal. Power, subtle shifts in the omnipresent hum of the ancilla grid that few could even register. The city lights, usually a steady, brilliant cascade, a bioluminescent glow, would experience momentary, almost imperceptible flickers like a fleeting wink of an eye, so brief that most citizens dismissed them as an optical illusion or a trick of their own neural processors. Minor disruptions would ripple through the vast data networks, causing a delay of nanoseconds in communication, a fractional pause in the holographic projections that adorned every public space. Her own engineers, alerted to these minor anomalies, dismissed them with a casual wave of a multi-jointed limb and a confident click of their vocalizers, explaining them away as negligible atmospheric interference, easily corrected harmonic imbalances, or perhaps even minor solar flares interacting harmlessly with the outermost energy collectors, assuring the Queen that such insignificant events were well within the grid's immense tolerance parameters and posed no threat whatsoever to the integrity of Lumina Prime. They presented flawless diagnostic readouts, green lights blinking reassuringly across vast control panels, showing no structural compromise, no overload, nothing that pointed to any actual danger. But Cale's data slate, which he now clutched almost constantly, its surface a window into a world of hidden energies, told a different story. Its screen, usually displaying elegant, if complex, patterns, now glowed with increasingly frantic, jagged waveforms and spiraling, unstable visualizations that seemed to writhe with invisible stress. He would approach her, always at moments when these subtle tremors were occurring, not shouting or demanding attention, but with a quiet intensity, his eyes locking onto hers, filled with a desperate urgency she couldn't ignore. He would hold up the slate, pointing to a graph, a trajectory, a sudden, sharp spike in a series of otherwise smooth lines, trying with a quiet, persistent determination to show her how the seemingly random cosmic events he had spoken of were aligning, not in a chaotic jumble, but like pieces of an invisible, meticulously orchestrated puzzle, each fitting into place to catastrophically disrupt the very core of the ancilla grid. He spoke of resonance, of sympathetic vibrations, of accumulated stress that defied direct measurement, but was building towards an inevitable, terrible crescendo. His explanations were alien to her engineers, who understood energy in terms of flow, load, and resistance, not in the terms of quantum whispers and cosmic symphonies that Cale seemed to perceive. They saw a perfectly functional system with minor, self-correcting jitters, Cale saw a finely tuned instrument about to shatter under an unheard note. The Queen's dismissiveness, once an unshakable wall of Lumina pride and scientific certainty, slowly began to crack under the relentless pressure of Cale's calm predictions and the undeniable, if minute, manifestations of his warnings. She found herself more than once glancing at her own crystalline data pad during these subtle flickers, then back at Cale's frantic slate, a cold sliver of unease beginning to snake through her. There were no alarms, no catastrophic failures, but the subtle, persistent hum of the ancilla grid, which had always been a steady, reassuring presence, now seemed to carry a faint, almost imperceptible disharmony, a dissonant note that only she perhaps had truly begun to hear, influenced by the human's unnerving foresight. The tremors were still small, still dismissible to the general populace, and even to her most brilliant minds, but for Queen Xylura they had begun to resonate with a growing, unsettling sense of dread. The human was not simply a nuisance. He was becoming a harbinger, and a subtle, creeping fear of what he might be right about was far more unsettling than any direct threat she had ever faced. The insidious anomalies that Cale had predicted, once dismissed as negligible, escalated with an unnerving precision that began to unravel the serene facade of Lumina Prime and chipped away at Queen Xylura's unwavering faith in her civilization's flawless technology. The momentary flickers in the city lights became more frequent, more prolonged, causing brief, unsettling moments of dimness that rippled through the grand crystalline spires and illuminated pathways, plunging areas into a disconcerting twilight before the full glow returned. Localized power outages, initially sporadic and easily ignored, became a daily occurrence, affecting critical infrastructure. Automated transport systems would seize up for agonizing seconds. Holographic communication links would sputter and die mid-sentence, and the massive, self-regulating agricultural complexes would experience brief, inexplicable interruptions in their energy flow, threatening delicate ecosystems. A palpable hum of unease began to replace the usual harmonious buzz of Lumina Prime, a low thrum of anxiety that vibrated beneath the surface of daily life, slowly escalating into a ripple of widespread panic as the disruptions grew more pervasive and less predictable. The perfect order of their world, once thought immutable, was showing cracks. Queen Xylura's chief engineers, brilliant and dedicated, their expertise honed over centuries of managing the ancilla grid, were baffled. Their diagnostic tools, once the epitome of accuracy, now churned out data that defied logic. They showed no physical faults in the conduits, no overloading processors, no structural weaknesses in the crystalline matrix of the grid itself. Instead, they registered unexplainable energy drains, power fluctuations that seemed to originate from nowhere and vanish into nothingness, leaving behind only perplexing data echoes that their established understanding of physics and engineering simply could not interpret. Their solutions rerouting energy, initiating redundant systems, recalibrating harmonic stabilizers offered only temporary reprieves, mere bandages on a wound they couldn't even properly see. The engineers, accustomed to solving every problem with cool logic and empirical data, found themselves confronted by an invisible, intangible enemy, a ghost in the machine that defied their every attempt to quantify or contain it. Their confident assurances to the Queen grew strained, their multifaceted eyes betraying a growing desperation that mirrored the rising. Fear in the populace. It was in the midst of this escalating chaos as the grand conclave buzzed with anxious whispers, and the usually placid, luminous citizens showed signs of genuine distress. But Cale, without being asked, without a single word of "I told you so," presented a detailed, predictive model of the next major fluctuation. His simple data slate, its screen, now a swirling vortex of energy patterns, displayed a precise timeline, a specific location on the grid, and an exact predicted intensity for an upcoming wave of disruption. The predictions were so precise, so